everyone, and welcome to this online service of Eliot Unitarian Chapel. My name is Reverend Krista Taves, and I have the honor of serving as your minister of congregational life beginning just last week. I want to thank all of you who have already so warmly welcomed me to the Eliot Chapel family, and I'm looking forward to meeting more of you after today's service. If you are watching this service on Sunday morning, April 23rd, you are invited to join us for a Zoom coffee hour at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Reverend Barbara Gayden, our senior minister, will also be with us to answer any questions or thoughts you may have about the announcement that went out earlier this week that our in-person Sunday services will be suspended until September. I know this was a difficult decision to make, and it was difficult for many of us to hear, including me, because I am impatient to meet you in person. But it is vitally important that we protect each other as long as we need to, until we can be certain that it is safe to have large gatherings again. So please do join us for our Zoom coffee hour this morning. If you are new to Eliot Unitarian Chapel or to Unitarian Universalism, congratulations on connecting to us virtually. I hope that your time with us is well spent and that you will feel enriched and strengthened for having joined our service. And I do hope that once we can resume our in-person Sunday services, that you will come and we will be able to welcome you in person. In the Unitarian Universalist tradition, we light a chalice to symbolize that we have entered sacred space and prepared our hearts to give and receive the spirit of love that emerges in beloved community. Please join with me in our chalice lighting with the words in your order of service. We light this chalice, the beacon that calls us to love, to justice, to a deepening of the spirit. Our opening hymn is number 61, Lo, the Earth Awakes Again. Time for All Ages story this week is Love the Weeds, an Iranian folk tale from Earth Care, World Tales to Talk About by Margaret Reed MacDonald. Perhaps many of our difficulties with nature could be solved by following this gardener's advice. Once the mullah tried gardening. In the Muslim tradition, the mullah is someone who is educated in Islamic theology and law and is seen as very wise. This mullah planted all kinds of seeds in his garden and waited for the beautiful flowers to spring up and bloom. A few did come up, but alas, the garden was mostly filled with unsightly weeds. They grew more quickly than the flowers, and they too budded, bloomed, and distributed wafts of seed. In desperation, the mullah made his way to the palace to consult with the palace gardener. This man was known for his skill with plants. "I have tried everything," complained the mullah. "I pulled them out, I hoed them out, I planted more flower seeds, and where do I end up with? Weeds, weeds, weeds." The gardener considered all this for a while, and then he offered his words of wise advice. "I think the best thing for you to do is to learn to love the weeds." And that is the end of our story for all ages. I would invite with you to join with me in the spirit of prayer and meditation as you are willing and able. Spirit of life and love, God of mercy, source of all things that changes us as we cannot change ourselves. We are children of this earth. We have come from this earth, and we will return to it someday, and it holds us now as we live our days, love our people, search for truth and meaning, anchor in gratitude for one more blessing of one more day. On this day, this beautiful, blessed day, may we be mindful of how we are changing because of this time. The stay-in-place order, the illness that is touching so many and in some cases claiming their lives, the changes to our work, our homes, and our families, the changes to our place of worship and our communities. Many of us are gaining a new clarity of what is indeed the most important, the spark of life that shines through our lives and shapes how we come together and reverence that which is most sacred, the love that is always within reach, even if we cannot see it or feel it, the love that holds us at all times. May compassion live through us, shine in our eyes, manifest through our hands, and grow in our hearts. Amen, and blessed be.
From Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. We are nature. Long have we been absent, but now we return. We become plants, trunks, foliage, roots, bark. We are embedded in the ground. We are rocks. We are oaks. We grow in the openings side by side. We browse, we too, among the wild herds, spontaneous as any. We are two fishes swimming in the sea together. We are what locust blossoms are. We drop scent around lanes, mornings and evenings. We are also the coarse smut of beasts, vegetables, minerals. We are two predatory hawks. We soar above and look down. We are two resplendent suns. We it is who balance ourselves, orbic and stellar. We are as two comets. We prowl fanged and four-footed in the woods. We spring on prey. We are two clouds, forenoons and afternoons driving overhead. We are seas mingling. We are two of those cheerful waves rolling over each other and interwetting each other. We are what atmosphere is, transparent, receptive, pervious, impervious. We are snow, rain, cold, darkness. We are each product and influence of the globe. We have circled and circled till we have arrived home again. we too. We have voided all but freedom and all but our own joy. So ends the reading.
In April, we are sharing our offering with Welcome Neighbors St. Louis. Welcome Neighbors St. Louis supports immigrants and refugees as they begin a new life in St. Louis. Services offered include family partnering to help read mail, schedule doctor's appointments, navigate insurance, and create a support system for those newly relocated to the U.S. You can read more about Welcome Neighbors St. Louis in our weekly newsletter, This Week at Eliot, and you can donate by following the instructions on our Facebook page and website. We also want to thank all of you who are keeping up with your pledges. Even though we are not meeting in person, please continue to do so as it helps to support our many life-saving ministries, both within our community and to our surrounding community. Let us take this morning's offering. Weeds became a part of my life at a very young age. In our family, once you turned 9 years old, you were old enough to work on the farm. Every summer morning, until the plants had grown thick enough to shield the soil from the sun, My mother, my brother, and I entered the fields with our newly sharpened hoes and worked our way up and down the rows as the younger brothers played in the shade at the edges of the field. Ragweed, elephant ear, thistle, crabgrass, burrs, sow thistles, the weeds fell through our dogged persistence. Now today I get quite nostalgic thinking about this time. My family is scattered across 3 time zones. We meet together only every few years, so it has become easy to romanticize the work that we did together. But in reality, it wasn't romantic at all. It was back-breaking work. The days were long. My mind often struggled to find new things to think about as we worked, and my body ached at night. I remember one day, the ground was so hard and the weeds were so thick, and I thought to myself, why are we doing this? These weeds are so strong. The crops we plant are weak. Why aren't we growing things that are already strong? The answer to this question, of course, is that there is no market for ragweed and sow thistle. Of course, we had to grow the things that we did. But the bigger balcony view answer is that we were breaking our backs for plants that were weak. We were fighting against what was natural for the soil, what actually belonged there. We were also fighting weeds that had simply become stronger because they survived the chemicals used to kill them. And what we often call weeds are nature's way of responding to deficiencies in the soil that is out of balance because of poor crop rotation, monoagriculture, and synthetic fertilizers. Farmers who transition from conventional to organic farming will say that weeds show them where the soil is in its process of restoration. The first few years are awful. The withdrawal of herbicides and fertilizers and pesticides leads to weedy infestations that are almost impossible to manage. You'll be tempted to give up because your fields look awful. But if you can be patient, stand tall while other farmers smirk at your weedy fields, you will get restored, organic soil. My 9-year-old self was already starting to wonder about how we find this balance, already thinking about what it means to restore things. When did you start to worry and wonder about that balance? When did you start to question the primacy of the market over the cycle of the seasons? When did you start wondering how we got to think we are so important that we come first in all things? Many of us are thinking a lot about this. Climatologists have been issuing dire warnings that we are running out of time. CO2 emissions have reached a level from which there is no point of return. We are actually beyond restoration and into harm reduction, trying to slow down what is happening to the earth because of us. Now, there are some parallels between the COVID-19 pandemic and the reality of climate harm reduction. We know, for instance, that social distancing is about slowing down infection rates while the scientists and medical professionals struggle to catch up. What we need are the right weeds. We need more people who are immune, which happens in only one way right now. You get the disease and you recover. But we don't even know how long you are immune after you have had the disease. We need this knowledge. We also need a vaccine, we need antibody tests, and we desperately need an effective treatment. So while many of us are hunkering down in our houses, there is a whirlwind of activity to increase the rate of testing, the quality of testing, and develop a vaccine and find a treatment. What would it be like if we achieved this same collective sense of urgency for the climate emergency? I know that some of us have this sense of urgency, but a lot of people are just starting to catch up. What we're seeing today in response to this pandemic is that when there is a political will and a public that supports action, things actually happen. Things get better. That's why we're going to get through this pandemic. We are like farmers watching a conventional field transition to organic. The weeds are exploding, and it would be so tempting to go back to life as normal. But if we want restoration, we have to be patient with the weedy fields. We need to be open to whatever is asked of us. And really, it's that openness that is the most important thing, because the climatologists, the scientists, the public health officials, the policy writers, the number crunchers, they have to know that we are on their side and that we'll stay there while it is messy. It means we can't travel for a while. We can't go into work, can't go to the grocery store without a mask, can't sit by a loved one who is in the hospital, which is heartbreaking. We're not going to open our businesses. We can't meet in person for worship, even though we are missing each other terribly. And it really isn't the same online. There is so much loss and anxiety. And we're trying to find ways to manage that loss and anxiety so that we don't do something stupid and make it worse. That same thing, that same management of messiness, loss, and anxiety will need to be embraced if we are to prevent the worst effects of climate change, especially for those who have the least ability to protect themselves from it. And we have seen, sadly, what happens when you can't manage the anxiety. These last weeks, protests have erupted all over the country, demanding an end to social distancing, saying it is a violation of liberty. And it's very possible that these protests, with many refusing to wear masks or maintain 6 feet of separation, will actually prolong the pandemic and increase the death rate. I know I have found myself incredibly judgmental of these protesters in a way that almost ruined a whole day for me. But we also know, what we do know is that none of us is immune to twisting up information that is inconvenient because it raises our anxiety. It's highly likely that each of us has given into infectious anxiety at some time, and that we have caused harm when we did. So rather than just delighting in self-righteous judgment, which can be quite delicious for a short while, but ultimately leaves us nowhere, the question is how we maintain a spiritual openness and generosity, the kind that we started out with when we began this social distancing. In our liberal religious tradition, openness and generosity are strengths, helping us to trust in a restoration that's happening even if we aren't personally able to see that the soil is regenerating right under our feet. Did you know that our Unitarian foremothers and forefathers had the same questions? In the late 1700s and 1800s, when Unitarianism broke through in Britain and North America, there was a battle going on for the question of truth itself. Where did truth come from? How did you discern what was true? These questions were energized by the crises of their day, and one crisis was what you did with inconvenient information. The inconvenient information of their day was the growing body of knowledge revealed through scientific research that was contrary to what was written in Scripture, which the majority of people in every class and station in the Western world considered to be 100% true. But then Galileo had to go and discover that the Earth rotated again around the sun. Next came the discovery that the Earth wasn't flat. Then archaeologists found artifacts that didn't jive with the Bible, and carbon dating revealed that the world was a whole lot older than anyone had imagined. These discoveries caused a crisis of faith. Now, some responded by trying to shut it all down, which is not so different from what we saw in the protests this week. But others wanted a new approach. They were determined to blend their faith and all this inconvenient information. This turned into a fierce contest between revealed theology and natural theology. Revealed theology is what many of us grew up with, this idea that God is a transcendent power that breaks into history and shapes what is right and true. The Bible is one of those breaks into history. The Trinitarian Jesus is another. The idea that God can reach into human life, reach into human history, and shape what happens here. That is revealed theology. Natural theology proposed that God created everything and then stepped aside and let it go. God was like a clockmaker. God built the clock, wound it up, and let it start ticking. Those who became the first Unitarians in Britain and the United States were drawn to this natural theology. They said that if you wanted to understand God, you needed to understand creation. This was a whole new way of looking at the world. So revelation didn't happen through a breaking in. Revelation was discovered as you discovered the laws of the universe that had been set into place at the beginning of time. Scientists were now our theologians, discovering ultimate truth and a window into the nature of God. This was really quite a shift in thinking. Natural theology created a path for those who didn't want to choose between faith and knowledge. They wanted a unity of spirit and mind. This is when we see a widespread use of nature metaphors to understand humanity. Like the reading from Walt Whitman this morning, we began to see ourselves within the cycles of nature as opposed to outside of them. If you look in our gray hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, there are many old hymns where the lyrics have been rewritten with a natural theology. Our opening hymn, number 61, Lo, the Earth Awakes Again, is exactly an example of natural theology and its impact on Unitarianism and Universalism. So for all that was really great about natural theology, though, it could only go so far because natural theology presumed an unchanging universe, an unchanging God, and a clear moment when creation was formed. When Darwin published On the Origin of Species, which showed that life is always evolving, it blew natural theology out of the water. The idea that creation was governed by a set of unchanging laws came apart. This is when humanism entered Unitarianism. We began to question if nature revealed God or if it just revealed itself. And what were we learning about ourselves? That we weren't the center. We weren't the supreme purpose of creation. This creation wasn't made for us, and we can't control it, because how can we control something that has formed us? So what does all this have to do with COVID-19 and CO2 emissions in 2020? Our historic embrace of theologies and philosophies that supported and amplified the lived realities of being on this earth is our legacy that we can draw on to remain in a place of openness and generosity with each other and the earth. In both cases, the pandemic and climate change, one of the most powerful strategies we have is for as many of us as possible to decenter ourselves, to get off the pedestal that has convinced far too many of us that humanity is the ultimate point of creation. We are not the point of creation. We are part of it. And we have to get out of the way so that the weeds can do their work. This is so counterintuitive to the way that we have been socialized. We want to do something, make our mark, exert our influence, be the heroes of the moment. Maybe you've heard what's been happening to CO2 emissions while we have been hunkering down. The air is cleaner. In Venice, Italy, the water is almost clear because there's almost no boat traffic and wildlife is reclaiming the canals. Maybe you saw the video going around this week of a jellyfish swimming through Venice. It was beautiful. In Llandudno, Wales, wild goats have moved into town because the streets are so empty. This is what happens when we get out of the way. The regeneration begins. Now, I have no doubt that as the virus diminishes, however that happens, And whatever that happens, we'll be back in our cars. The canals of Venice will fill with boats, the streets will be full, and most of us will happily reconnect with loved ones that we are missing dearly. But I do hope that we don't waste this experience, that it becomes a moment to shift our priorities in ways that many of us have yearned for, that this is a moment for us to learn how to think differently, live smaller, even as our hearts grow larger. It's been a long time since I went out into the fields with my family to fight the weeds. Since then, my parents did in fact transition from conventional to organic on a large part of their farm. They watched their beloved fields fill with weeds and then reaped the benefits of their patience with almost 25 years of organic harvests. The soil has returned to its own rhythms. And that is my prayer for us. My prayer is that the rhythms of this time stay with us, regenerate and restore us and this earth that we love so much. Amen and blessed be.
The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. This land is holy, and so are we. This land is holy, and so are we. This land is holy, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The storm is raging, and so are we. The storm is raging, and so are we. The storm is raging, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The sun is shining, and so are we. The sun is shining, and so are we. The sun is shining, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be.
Our closing words are the song that is sung at the Unitarian Church of Quincy, where I have served for the last 5 years in every service. Open to new learning, may your lips bring truth into the world. May your heart know love and your hands do the work of justice as you go your way in peace. As you go your way in peace. Love to you all. May you have a good rest of your day, a good rest of your week, and see you next Sunday.